Welcome back, welcome back. We're now on M2, and M2 says we need to assess the importance of own work experience plan to support own learning and development. We have been doing a work experience plan prior, but I didn't make it very obvious that it was a work experience plan, which is fine. There's no wrong way to do a work experience plan. Some people, some teachers are going to prefer you use some form of template to fill in. I don't think that was necessary, but if that's what you prefer to do, that's fine. I'll explain in a bit. This does not have an extra section on the specification document like the previous ones did, so there's no extra detail there specifically for this. This section will be a mini culmination of the previous section, so they all come together here. The previous sections have been an actual work experience plan, as I've mentioned before, so I believe it was P3 and P4 where you're looking into the work experience, the ones that you would like to do. Now, you do not have to do it my way. If you prefer to use a work experience plan template, that's fine. So if I go back to Google quickly, I think I Googled one earlier. Now, if you Google the term work experience plan template, you can find one of these random templates and fill one in. And that would be your work experience plan template. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way. That's perfectly fine. If you wanted to, you could have easily used a template and fill that in. Once it constitutes as a work experience plan, it doesn't really matter how it's done. Before you can plan, you need to give a brief description of what a work experience plan is. Now, we haven't done that before because, again, it wasn't made very explicit, but because this specific section is asking us to speak about the work experience plan that we've done prior, now we need to define the work experience plan. What is the purpose of a plan in general? Just a general planning thing, right? Why do people plan? Why it's important, generally speaking. And then in turn, what is the purpose of a work experience plan? Okay, so this is a way of building up our knowledge from the very basic ground level of what is a plan, why do we plan, and then on top of that, why do we plan for work experience, or what is a work experience plan? After you've done this section, this is something that you do need to speak about, so you need to write this in your documents. This section here, assess generally, means to find out if there's value in something. That's not something you have to write in your document. This is just me explaining what assess means typically. Now, let me go over this again. You need to go over what is the purpose of a plan, and in turn, what is the purpose of a work experience plan. This gives a nice definition, a nice intro of two separate things where you can then reference later on. Because if you find a decent website that describes what a plan is, that's one, and you can read it, understand it, and rewrite it. That's one reference. And you find another one that briefly describes what's the purpose of a work experience plan. That's another reference. Now, again, make sure you read it, understand it, and rewrite it. Assess, you do not have to do that section. Is the work experience plan important? I think personally for me, I would say overall it is important. Not every single aspect of it is important, but overall it is. Do you think it is important in supporting your development? For me, again, 100% in quite a few ways. If you think it is important, say why and say how exactly. Now, I've just noted a few things down here. M2 is going to be relatively easy, but it might be long because again, I think for merit you should go in and explain why. So the first thing I have is it helps me to manage my time better. This is important because, and I've left a few dots there. Why is it important to manage your time better, and how? Not just why, but how. It helps you to manage your time better because you've sat down and you've planned your tasks. You've set relative times as to when they should finish. Now, even if things don't go according to plan, even let's just say, for example, you're planning to do something in 1 hour, it takes an hour 15, an hour and a half, that's perfectly fine. The fact that you planned it, you gave yourself some constraint. It wasn't just, I'll do this thing and I'll eventually finish it, right? It's always a good idea to give your time constraints so that you try and stick to those as closely as possible. It helps me plan tasks. Now, again, say how and why. Now, it helps me plan tasks because during the work experience plan, I have to decide on things I want to do moving forward, and I make those into mini tasks or tiny tasks, and then I can then sit down after I've made a massive list or a list in general and then work out which one I need to do and how I need to do it as well. Next one, I say it helps me to stay focused. More or less the same thing. These two can probably be linked together. You don't have to link them if you don't want to. If you can find a better way to word this or have a completely different list, that's perfectly fine. Let me zoom in. It helps me to stay focused because, again, I have my tasks and I have my time management. Those two things come together to help with focus, because if I only have an hour, hour and a half to do a specific task, and I know that I have tasks to do before and after that, I'm going to try and stick to my times as rigidly as possible if it makes sense to. Now, I can always make changes as and when needed, but the fact that I actually have a time constraint and I have tasks that I have planned, it does help me better to stay focused. Have a curated checklist of things I need to do to get to my end goal. It is not ad hoc. Simply put, again, this is kind of linked back to the planning of tasks. But in this case, you have a checklist. So let's just say you wanted to go on an electronic engineering work placement. You would have a checklist of things you need to do to get to your end goal. So you want to be a qualified, competent electronic engineer. You're going to need to learn the various formulas. You're going to need to learn how to design circuits, how to build circuits, how to test circuits, most likely how to program in some embedded language. I think C is probably the most popular one, or maybe VHDL. It really doesn't matter, right? The whole point is you have a curated checklist tailored to you. Now, everyone can have a checklist. I can have a checklist of 100 things of engineers. Again, I've mentioned before, engineering has so many branches within it that this checklist could go on and on and on. But because you've done your work experience plan, and that entailed you researching about the companies, researching about the roles, researching about the specific skills you would need for that specific role, you have a curated checklist of things you need to do to get to your end goal. The other one, again, the work experience plan. Now, the importance of it gives me a list of expectations or responsibilities, which I can always refer to. So things that are expected of me within my role, I know them because I planned. I sat down, I researched that company, I researched that specific job or job role, and I know typically what companies would want. It might not be every single thing, but at least you have the expectation that, I don't know, you're going to turn up early, you're going to work half an hour here in the morning to have a meeting. It really doesn't matter. Whatever the expectation is, you know what it is. Whatever the responsibilities are that you will have, you know, because again, your work experience plan has helped you to dive deeper into the job roles that you were looking into. So for me, that's why I would say work experience plan or a work experience plan is important, because it helps me in supporting my own learning and development. And these are some of the reasons I think the work experience plan helps to do that. This is not an extensive list. This is just random stuff I came up with that I think would be beneficial. If you guys can add more, which in most cases you should be able to, add more. I gave what, five, and probably two or three of these can even be joining into a massive paragraph. But this is how I would assess the importance of. I think it is important because, and I've given the reason I think it's important. These are the reasons why I think it's important, and it's adding value. The main thing when assessing something is to add value, and these are the ways that I think personally for me that a work experience plan adds value to me. Now, again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is not an extensive list. This is not everything I could think of. This is just some random stuff I thought of straight away. Two or three of these can 100% be joined. For example, I think it helps me. These three could probably be joined, right? These are all linking into one thing. But again, having them separate and explaining in great detail how the work experience plan adds value to each of these, or adds value to you using each of these methods, I think would be a good way to do this. Now, again, this is not the only way to do this. This is simply my interpretation of what needs to be done. I think this is pretty exhaustive of what needs to be done. And after this, you wouldn't need to do much more for M2.